So I think I'm going to take this opportunity to demonstrate a really powerful feature in Substance Painter where we can actually modify our low poly geometry and re-import it. So this is just not really working. It's too intense. Like if it was a little bit more subtle, I think I could live with it, but it's pretty noticeable. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to head back over to Maya and just modify the UV layout a little bit so that we don't have to do a triplanar projection to get these little insets here on the handle. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Maya, and then here's the geo. I've just re-imported it. Now one thing that's important to keep in mind is you need to make sure that the name of the asset hasn't changed. If you import, you might have like a little 1 next to the name, and that's gonna throw it off when you get into Painter. It's not a real hard problem to solve. In fact, maybe I'll go ahead and just make sure that this is sitting on a different material name so that we can see what the solution is. But I'm going to just open up the UV editor, and we can see right there that edge is a sort of an awkward spot for there to be a UV seam because we were getting that separation there in our insets. So I'm just going to go ahead and find the edge, just right click and go to edge, and I can see, okay, so it's there and there. So this is probably where I should have cut this edge right here, and that'll be here, right? So I'm going to just come over and cut that edge, and then I want to weld these two shells together so I no longer have that seam there. So we'll go to Move and Sew here in the Cut and Sew menu. And then because there is this tiling pattern on this, I want to make sure that I have as little distortion in here as possible. Otherwise, in fact, if we head back over to Painter for a second, you might be able to see, let me set this back to UV projection. You can see that I've got some distortion here where they're getting kind of squashed. And I think part of the reason for that is because I made the texture borders vertical. I sort of forced that to happen. So if I can go to my Tools menu, and just bring it onto the recording area, and we'll go to Unfold and then Optimize. You can see that's what the UV shell actually wants to do. If it's accommodating, I think we'll stick with Optimize. Accommodating its actual geometry, and the rest of it we can leave as is, but obviously we're going to need to do a re-layout here. So I think my menu options haven't changed, and we can see we're getting a little bit of breathing room, and everything else is looking pretty good. So this will be our new UV layout, and if we come over here and look in world space where we can see those seams, now we've just got one seam up there and then one seam down the front, and those will be visible, but it's not going to be as noticeable as before in terms of the corner distortion anyway. Alright, so we've got the wrong material name assigned here, or not necessarily the wrong one, but just a different one from what Painter is looking for, and the UVs are correct. So we'll go ahead and do an export selection, and I recommend whenever you make a change like this, you may just want to create a new file so you can go back to the original state if need be. We'll go over to Substance Painter. So the way I update this geometry is I go Edit, Project Configuration, head to Select, and then select the new geo. Let me make sure this is in the recording area. And we'll leave all of this stuff at the defaults. We'll hit OK. And what we can see is everything went white, and the reason for that, as I mentioned, is we have basically imported a new material, so we've left behind all of the work that we did because that's sitting on this other material here. So to fix that, I'm going to go to the Settings menu, and we've got this option. It's going to be just a little bit off the screen here, but it says Reassign Texture Sets. And so this is the disabled texture set that was in the scene, Hammer Matte, and this is the new one. So all we need to do is click and drag from the old one to the new one, and you can see now this will be our project texture sets, and this is now our disabled one. So if we just hit apply here, this is what we get, and you can see that there are obviously some issues, and the reason there are issues is because we need to go back to our bakes. Remember, we baked our high poly and low poly stuff so that we can update all of our mesh maps according to our new UV layout. So the process for that is very simple. We just click on Bake Mesh Maps. All of this stuff is exactly as it was. Our high poly hasn't changed, so we can use that, and then we just need to make sure we've still got our subsampling set to 2x2, and the rest of the stuff is fine. We'll go ahead and hit bake, select the textures, and I'll pause the video. So here we can see the updated result, and if I show you the handle, you can see there is still a little bit of a seam right down the middle, but all of the corners now look a whole lot better. So if we look at the UVs, head over to 2D only, now we can see we basically have one sheet here, not counting the bottom, but one section where a tiling texture of those little dots is being applied uniformly over that space, and there isn't a whole lot of distortion here in our UV shell, so that it's the little circle things are showing up as being pretty consistent in terms of their overall size. Okay, so if we look at the reference, let me minimize this, so you can see we actually don't have any on the top, and on the bottom it kind of cuts off as well. So we can just mask that out in a second, but I just want to explain something that's kind of cool. So all of this stuff here, we assign this paint by clicking on the geometry. And if I go back to my project configuration, you can see one of the options here that's on by default is preserve stroke positions on mesh. So what that means is you can actually make a lot of changes to your geometry, not just the UVs, and every single time you do anything in Substance Painter, it remembers the position of the camera, the angle of the camera, and where on the mesh you clicked or painted or did whatever you were doing. So what that means is you can make pretty significant changes to your geometry, and so long as you don't change the overall shape of it significantly, you can expect for your texturing work to be propagated up to the new configuration of whatever your mesh happens to look like. So that is just a super duper powerful feature, and it's very, very useful. So you have a lot of flexibility in changing things after you've already begun texturing, which is kind of it's one of the great things about this tool that used to not be the case. So it's something that I really, really appreciate. And another thing about it that's kind of worth mentioning is you don't have to get everything perfect. Like I think I might have said this earlier, but the UVs that you do before you start texturing they almost never survive in an unaltered state. There's always going to be some modifications and some edits that become obvious once you get in and start texturing. So just an FYI, don't spend too much time doing anything with your UVs until you've actually begun the process of texturing. Alright, and I just noticed that I've got this extra little section down here that needs to have its assignment corrected. So I'm just gonna sometimes when you're looking through here, you're trying to figure out which layer is affecting your geometry. Like when you have a lot more, it's nice to just kind of go through, and I'm just holding Alt here and just clicking on the masks just to kind of see like who's talking to what part of the mesh, because there isn't an easy way to like select the mesh and then figure out which layer it's being modified by, because you can have many layers affecting a specific section of the geo. So anyway, I'm going to go over to Paint. And we'll just go ahead and set this to black, and I'll grab those two faces there. Alright, so now I want to go ahead and knock the inset dots out of the top and the bottom there. So we're going to go to Rubber Grip, and here's my paint. That's actually the whole layer, right? So this is actually where it's nice to have individual control over the mask, so that this mask is driving everything. So what I need to do now is basically add a new mask to this dots here. So I've got my circles fill in the mask. If I click on that, you can kind of see what's happening there. And what I want to do is I just want to eliminate a few of these top rows and a few of them down here at the bottom. So I am going to add a paint. And into that paint, we'll go ahead and select the brush now, because I don't want to be working in any kind of a geometric context. I don't want to be dealing with faces. I actually need to paint on the surface like this. So we're going to go ahead and grab a different brush. I want one with a nice, well, okay, let me show you a couple options here. So we got brushes. So I can either use the basic hard brush or the basic soft, but the only difference between these two brushes here is some of the settings. And in particular, so what I want is hard, so I get a nice sharp line there. But to make it a little bit, a little softer, where is it? It's in here somewhere. It's this right here. This little hardness slider. So a lot of them can be kind of similar. I'm not going to go too in depth with the brushes because there just isn't time in this conversation. But one of the things that we can do here, because I kind of want to go right across the top here, I could come over and paint. If you hold Shift after you click, you can get this line, which actually works pretty well. And I know where I am with my line here. Like I just want to cut the top row off basically. So this is actually probably the best way to go about doing that. And then we don't need to worry about what's happening up here because that's going to get eliminated by this mask. So I'm going to tap M to go back to the material, and there we go. That looks very nice. Let me just make sure the top is nice and clean. Looks like I missed those there. So again, I'm just painting black into this paint layer. And it's sitting on top of this, so it's basically just eliminating it. And then let's see, well, I guess we'll maybe just arbitrarily pick that row to preserve. So there are some controls for modifying the brush sizes. And for this one, there's a lot. I mean, like I kind of have to at this point have it memorized, just muscle memory. But if you hold Control and middle mouse scroll, you can change this. Control and right mouse scroll. Let's see. I guess those are both size. One of them is going to be, so there's rotation. You can see the flow there is moving back and forth. Anyway, the real point of this is like there's kind of a lot of them, and I'm not going to talk about all of the controls right now. I think that stuff is covered in a little more detail in, well, perhaps in the next tutorial would make sense. We're just running out of time now. So anyway, we will continue this in the next video.